What we'd like to do today is briefly provide our report. I'm just going to move quickly here to the first major slide. We'd like to provide our report structured around the turnaround principles, which are really the guiding force behind federal funding for turnaround work. The first turnaround principle is to provide strong leadership. We've made a tremendous effort to improve the leadership at Roosevelt this year and implement a distributed model. Ms. Henry is our leader, and she has a number of individuals that work with her to implement all of the different elements of the design. One of the things that we're frankly most proud about is that we were courageous and that we made changes in leadership when we needed to. There's nothing that's going to be more important to driving the turnaround day in and day out, minute by minute, period by period, than having strong leaders in the school, in the classrooms, in the hallways. And when leaders were not meeting the expectations that we had for them, we made change. Ms. Henry started the year as an academy director and assistant principal for our 11th and 12th grade. And because leadership needed to be improved throughout the year, we were able to promote her, and she's now leading the school. We have very high teacher attendance, and that's a strong indication that the school is going in the right direction. I'm going to hand it over to Donna now to talk a little bit about some of the academic indicators.
One of the reasons I believe that we did have a high teacher attendance rate was because of the support that was available for the teachers. We measure teachers' performance on a quarterly basis using the Edison Learning Framework for Learning and Teaching, and the school leadership team does regular observations and coaching and feedback sessions around rigor, assessment, and pedagogy for the teachers. And once the school leadership team is able to analyze the observational data, we then use that to drive the professional development for the teachers. The next two slides are examples of the weekly professional development calendar, and as you can see, it's very detailed and includes everyone on that are a part of the Roosevelt faculty, from teachers to security teams. Turnaround Principle 3 addresses the redesigning of the school day. We did extend the school day, and we implemented a period called Our Meeting, which is a 30-minute block in which learning coaches can address social and emotional issues with students so that they begin their school day in the frame of mind ready to learn. This year, our summer school program is held with 2 sessions. We had 119 students in the first session, and they were able to recover credits in all levels of English, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, History, and Science as well. Additionally, we began our Freshman Success Academy, which is for incoming 9th graders, to build a foundation for them to be successful in their first year of high school. And so they will begin in August being familiar with their teachers, their peers. They've been through team building activities, as well as we were able to do some diagnostic testing so that they are placed appropriately at the start of the school year. This year, 23 of seniors began on track for graduation, meaning that they had earned enough credits to fulfill the Core 40 requirements. Through our online e-recovery program, 61 students were able to recover credits throughout the course of the school year. However, about 85 students will be returning as 5th years next year in order to pursue the requirements to earn a Core 40 diploma. And this implementation of this program is very imperative because it requires additional staff to service those additional 85 students who would have graduated if they had been on track. Turnaround Principle 4 addresses the instructional program. At the beginning of the year, we implemented Read 180 and System 44, which are reading interventions, in addition to Achieve 3000, which includes the other subject areas, history, science, and math. We also have a blended learning course option. This year, our 11th grade students took classes online in economics, government, physics, pre-calculus, and Spanish as well. Our alternative education program is for our students who are exhibiting behavioral challenges in the mainstream, and so they are able to proceed towards their Core 40 requirements in the alternative education program, but receive support that they need behaviorally so that they can transition back into the mainstream high school. As I stated, the Read 180 program was instituted. We only had space for 120 students, which means we had 120 licenses and had to pick which students needed those services. Students who participated in the program, specifically for middle school students, they demonstrated a mean gain of 117 Lexile points, and that exceeded the expectation by 47 points. In the high school, they demonstrated a mean gain of 34.7 Lexile points. The goal is to expand the program and acquire additional licenses so that we can service more students than the 120 who were in the program this year.
If I just may, and this sort of addresses Mr. Pickett's point from earlier, much of the funding request that we've made for the forthcoming year is about expanding interventions that were already in place. There's only so much money to buy so many seats or licenses for various types of intervention programs. They don't necessarily require additional staffing, which will be difficult to sustain, but the programs will be able to impact more students in the forthcoming year. And so it's an iterative process to expand until we've got the right number.
While Read 180 is specifically a reading intervention, Achieve 3000, we implemented this during a research period as well as foundational learning, which was a 30-minute block used to help students, accelerate students, giving them strategies to be successful in the classroom. One of the best things about Achieve 3000 is that it encompasses all of the subject areas. So you can go onto the program and read an article about biology, but it helps the students around their specific Lexile points. And as you can see, they exceeded the expectation by 15.5 points. 20%, students with IEPs represent over 20% of our populations. Students with IEPs who were enrolled in System 44 or Reading 180 experienced a Lexile gain of 98 points. Our goal is to add 30 additional licenses for our students with IEPs for the 2013-2014 school year. Turnaround Principle 5 addresses data to inform instruction. Data is everything that we do at the school. At the beginning of the year, in August, early fall, we administered the SRA in order to determine student Lexile levels as well as determine the appropriate placement for the students. Also, on a monthly basis, students take the monthly benchmark assessment, which is provided by Edison Learning, and this measures student performance against end-of-year standards, state standards, as well as Common Core standards. Cohorts of students experience growth throughout the school year at various grade levels. The data from the monthly Evaluate assessment is analyzed by teachers on a horizontal level, meaning that all teachers from the same grade level but different content areas examine the data together so that they can identify interventions for groups of students as well as specific students. And teachers use this data to develop reteaching plans on a regular basis. Todd.
Turnaround Principle 6 is about establishing a school environment to improve safety and discipline. This was the first priority that we had during the year was to radically change the school culture. We did that by establishing a set of foundational core values and building a community code that was focused on positive behavioral supports. About rewarding positive behaviors instead of punishing negative behaviors was really the point. This was a challenge for us. This was not something that was easy. I think you probably know from the reports that we submit on a monthly basis that the number of suspensions in our school was extraordinarily high. We had a significant number of behavioral challenges. But I can tell you that over the course of the year, we looked at those data extremely closely. We normalized the data. We looked at the number of incidents per 100 students per day. We evaluated where the incidents were happening, if we had problem spots with teachers in the physical location. And over the course of the year, we began to see improvement as we modified our plan, as we used resources differently, and we saw improvements. We did this by actually asking our teachers and our teacher teams to do extraordinarily deep analysis of what was going on, what was driving student behaviors, if behaviors were not acceptable, what were the root causes? Were we responsible for creating an environment in which it was easy to misbehave? Or were there things that were coming from the outside that were contributing factors, and how do we need to address those? And so this is the kind of data analysis that we ask each of our teams to do, and over the result of the year, we began to get significant improvement. We also implemented some more structural types of changes beyond just moving people around. We did start an alternative program, which seemed to be having a great effect already. Turnaround principle number 7 is providing ongoing mechanisms for family and community engagement. We've talked about these a number of times throughout the year about how we worked with community and tried to respond to stakeholders beyond those in the four walls of the school. One statistic that we think that we're very proud of after this first year is that we had 35% of parents attend student learning conferences. These are student-led conferences that are held on a quarterly basis to go over the student's performance in that quarter and to set a goal that the parent, the student, and the teacher can agree to work on over the next quarter. 35% is nowhere near where we would like to be. We certainly would like to be at 100% of the parents coming into the school. But we know from looking at data during the observation year that less than 5% of parents were typically coming in to do a report card pickup kind of thing, and almost none of them were actually meeting with teachers on a regular basis. So it's a real indication of the kind of way that we're engaging community, that parents are being more active in their students' learning and spending more time in the school. We've also had a number of community partners that have gotten very involved in the school, such as the Indiana Parenting Institute, who are working both with students and parents, the Friends of TED, which is chaired by the mayor, Freeman Wilson, and is engaging a lot of the community partners and providing support and resources to the school. So we have a number of challenges that we've talked about that we're going to continue to address. Attendance was not anywhere near where we'd like it to be. In order for students to learn and achieve, they need to be in school, and we need to get them there. We're going to be putting a big effort into addressing truancy, making students want to be in school more, and making that a huge priority going forward.
Do you know which way you're going on that?
It's very hard to tell. I mean, the reported attendance was much higher, but based upon our observations during the observation year, which are anecdotal only, it's hard to believe that attendance was above 90% as was reported.
Have you met your goals regarding student achievement
Well, we don't know yet. We don't have the data.
in terms of your ECAs?
Things are moving in the right direction. Our ECA performance is above what it was in previous years, but again, it still is early for all of that, but we'll be reporting that in detail. Funding, as we've talked about, is an ongoing concern. We've applied for the 1003G grant, and as we've discussed, ongoing funding after only 1 year is important, as we have a 4-year plan that we're trying to implement here. We've talked a number of times about our relationship with the Gary School Corporation. That continues to be a challenge. We're continuing to engage in a mediation to try to finish a shared services agreement, and we're hopeful that that can be completed in the near future. No, that is not complete.
You don't have it. This was last year we were talking about this.
That's correct.
Who's mediating it?
The DOE sponsored a mediation. There is an
When did that begin?
It began in February, I believe.
And it's not complete.
No.
Is there a timeline on the mediation? Don't you usually in mediation have a step-by-step and say we're going to get to something here?
Yes, we had a number of face-to-face meetings in February and March, and then we agreed to move towards sort of exchanging paper and that sort of thing, and the process has just slowed down considerably since then.
There's real consequences to this situation, dribbling and drabbling on. Mr. Walker, you're in the neighborhood. What do you see?
Well,
we don't have an agreement how to operate?
this is a point of frustration for me. It's been my position from day one that the department probably should have been involved from Jump Street a little more aggressively last year. We let this just carry on far too long, and I think whatever intercession needs to happen for us to get to a conclusion should take place immediately.
It was my understanding that there's some legal documents being exchanged amongst the parties, correct?
They're supposed to be.
I
I don't know that it's going to be productive for us to go into the details of where the mediation
Right,
is.
we've been making some
If
progress.
you'd like, I'm happy to do that. I can say that we've provided the mediator with everything that we can, and I believe that he is attempting to get responses from the school corporation at this point. That's my understanding. There are some significant impacts. I mean, the biggest impact is that if we have another incident like we had in the winter when the heat went off, we'll end up back in court, and that's really what we want to avoid. We want to have a productive working relationship where we can address issues having to do with shared services such as transportation or facilities maintenance without having to resort and spend taxpayer dollars on those kinds of intervention. So it is our goal absolutely to complete this mediation. We appreciate the work that the department has done to begin that process, and we believe we've provided the mediator with everything that is needed to move forward.
Answer down a little more directly. I think we should set a date of our August meeting to address this from a punitive position if that mediation is not concluded successfully.
Well, here again, the larger point on the board, we decided to do this, and we had to, didn't seem like there wasn't any other option. We came to that conclusion. Now we have a requirement to do it right and to be swift and good leaders and move. Otherwise, children have consequences. And to think a struggling school and struggling performance, you get to shut down school because we can't keep the heat on, the adults all around should be very embarrassed. These are not trivial matters. The futures of these children, that's what this is all about. The future of the children in that community, to think the adults couldn't come up with an agreement to keep the heat on is unconscionable. And by August, we should have some answers, and I don't know what punitive work that goes on. If it seemed like they would have the aspiration of the children, it'd be enough, but if we have to go punishment, I guess we will. But I don't see how we can continue like this.
And finally, I'd like Ms. Henry just to talk about our priorities for the forthcoming school year.
Next year, currently the class of 2014, 28 of those students are on track for graduation, and that's of a class of 148. And so the plan is to really work with those students on recovering those credits during the school day and to make graduation plans for them and to see as many of them walk across the stage in May of 2014 as possible. Additionally, we will be implementing our Flex Model Blended Learning Program in grades 7 through 9, where students will receive 50% of their instruction online and 50% of their instruction directly from the teacher. Lastly, as I stated earlier, the fifth-year program for those seniors who need to accumulate the additional credits for their Core 40 diploma, that is definitely a priority, as well as Mr. McIntyre has expressed the operating agreement between Theodore Roosevelt and the Greek Gary School Corporation. I am very hopeful that we will continue to see successes from the students, and we are committed to the success of our students. Our young Panthers deserve a quality education, and we will continue to work towards that, and I'm confident that every student will experience success on some type of level for the 2013-2014 school year.
Thank you.
I don't think we have the partners for presentation. Well, we're going to finish all discussion. The last item under discussion is the 2013 Special Education Child Count. I know you received a copy of the report. Do we have any questions or discussion regarding it? I believe the department is required to give you an updated report when we take an updated count in April.
I just was, there's nothing we have to do, right? It's just a report.
Well, it's just for discussion, it's just a report to you.
Right.
Just asking if you have any questions regarding it.
What, the only question I might have is what's the percentage of federal funding? I always, in between reports, I always forget how much money we actually have
Becky?
to spend. Do you know, Becky?
What's your question, Danielle?
Kind of what percentage
The
of-
April count has nothing to do with funding. It's really to give you an update of the changes since the
Right.
December 1 count.
But there was money, there were figures associated with the report just showing how much,
There are totals of money on it.
yeah. That's
Count
all.
A and count B.
State, oh, that's the state totals, so I guess, does that mean you're not seeing? Yeah, so
It
it,
would just give you the difference. If we used April 1
right,
count to inform the additional pupil count state tuition support that we do out of, that would be, I'm guessing that's what that is without it in front of me.
I see. No, so, all right, so my question is tangential or perhaps even irrelevant, but still it's a question. So if you, just of the approximate, it looks like we spend about $475 million total. It says here total on the different levels of children with special needs. So I'm just curious, do you know, is that all state money? Is that some state and some federal, all federal? That's just my
That would-
question.
These are state
It
totals?
would all be
I
state
believe.
money
all
because we
state
don't
money.
do a per pupil amount in federal money. We do distribute, this year, beginning July 1, we'll distribute a little more than $233 million to the traditional public and charter schools for special ed. And it's formulaic, it's not a per person, per student amount.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it does, thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding it? Sarah, did you have something? Okay. All right. Back to adjudication.
I'm sorry, before.
Oh, so sorry.
I apologize, I was reading something if I missed it. None of the other lead partners or folks are presenting today?
There wasn't a request for that. Did we have any lead partners who wanted to speak? I think they gave you information. I think so.
Okay. So the only other comment then, for the record in a sense, is that I want to just remind or point out to my colleagues that the Voyager report also raises a funding issue to the extent that they've indicated that, we know that IPS is under significant financial strain, I guess you might say. It's just facing a very large fiscal deficit. They have seemed to have indicated to Voyager that they are not able to fund the services going forward that Voyager has provided. And what's troubling about that is that you'll recall, of course, as Dan's reminded us in our journey of turnarounds, that we agreed, the board agreed, the department agreed to not essentially, I'm putting this kind of bluntly, so forgive me, not diplomatically, but we agreed not to take over Marshall, but instead to accept IPS's plan for remediating Marshall, which included, or which was kind of contingent on or heavily dependent on, the relationship with Voyager. I certainly presumed, and I can't speak for anybody else on the board, but I wouldn't be surprised if my colleagues didn't also assume that that was going to be a multi-year effort. So if indeed the district is unable to continue its support of the Voyager initiative, one has to ask then what the status of John Marshall becomes in terms of the state board and a decision to have to assume responsibility for Marshall. It was a failing school. We accepted an alternative to state. We obviously have a number of options when it comes to failing schools. And instead of choosing the option of a takeover or turnaround operator, we accepted the district's proposal, which included and incorporated the engagement of Voyager. If Voyager is now not going to be engaged, at the very least I would suggest to my colleagues, since I won't be here anymore, that we need an alternative plan from IPS about how they are going to continue the turnaround of John Marshall. And if they are not able to provide an acceptable plan, that raises the possibility that the state board might have to intervene in a different way than it has heretofore.
Ms. Nancy Hinkle, would you like to address it? Ms. Hinkle? Yes, you may. Sure may.
Oh. Hi, sorry, thank you for being here. I didn't realize you were here.
In response to your question, sir, I met with Voyager on Friday, and certainly I think the report today would show that the benchmarks, for the most part, came down. One of the conversations that we've had, we met with those principals, and I want to point out, Mr. Elster, I know you had a concern about the full principal. That will not continue for the principal, associate principal, for all reasons you know. We are building there our responsibility because we anticipated we would appear before you again, obviously to not only show that improvement of what we intend to do. At some point, this school has to fly and build capacity within. So there will be an English language arts, an instructional coach, a math coach that will be working closely with the instructional calendars that are in place prior to the windows to ensure that teachers are using effective practices in their classrooms to build teacher quality, the ability to do that, as well as make sure that we're responding to the data on our scrimmages, as we call them, or formative assessments. Previous to my short tenure on March 5th in IPS, we had no current technical education in any of the high schools other than it was a magnet program in tech. I've since dismantled that, and next year John Marshall will be offering 8 A+1 certification, which is computer networking. So they have the ability on their metrics to offer dual credit and/or industry certifications. And we're preparing to train someone. We are not in the position to do the Connexus work next year, but we're going to train someone now, so a year from now, we're poised to do that. We also recognize the school culture issue is a huge issue, and so I've connected with principals. There's a young man that you recognize named Thomas Sims, Dickinson Fine Arts Academy in South Bend, who turned that school from an F to an A in 1 year. I just got a little personal side note. They were using the ASAP instructional process. Sorry.
I wonder where they got that.
I don't know. Some girl. They did, based on some information I had from Jim Larson, who was previously responsible for that, they did an incredible job with the incentives and accountability and holding students to get those benchmarks. So I connected them, asked them to connect with Mr. Sims, because I think there's a lot to learn. So I want to reassure you that I believe that when we come before you, whether that's in August or September, that we will have a strong plan that will continue to move forward, as well as a monitoring plan to ensure that IPS assumes that goal that was provided by Voyager. But I'm certainly open to any comments or suggestions that you may have. I'd rather hear those now if we need to adjust that plan.
Am I correct? I had heard that Voyager was leaving templates and leaving some things in place that they had started with this
Yes,
partnership and in transitioning over. Is that correct?
Yes, so I met with Zimmy on Friday. They have a number of the templates, and of course they've left extensive structures behind that are still available to us at John Marshall to continue to reference and move forward.
Well, I think your point's well taken, Neil, that we do need to see another plan. I mean, that's most
I
definitely.
guess what I would certainly want to hear from you, the decision about certainly facing financial issues, but candidly, with a school that was as fragile as John Marshall prior to this agreement, if you will, I don't know how to say this, but essentially the resources have to be there to continue our progress. Because we certainly don't want to be in another situation with potentially be by the state. Yes, sir.
Peggy, you haven't been there long, but are the metrics showing progress at John
Yes, sir.
Marshall?
I believe, as I recall, almost all of the metrics were met.
And it's unfortunate that we don't have all the metrics available, because if we'd had the ISTEP information, we would have a very clear report today on all of these schools. I would like to make a comment, because much of the discussion today has been around funding. And I just think perhaps there might be some misunderstanding amongst the board. No one has directly asked me, but I will say that in terms of support for our failing schools, this department plans to do just that. We are looking at all the applications of the SIG G money and the SIG A money. We are well aware of the schools that are the lowest performing and intend to support them to be sure that they're going to be functional. So if anybody has any doubt with that, you needn't, because I plan to do that. We are doing the process right now on G. And Danielle, did you find out what the process was last year? Because I was unaware of it.
Okay. Good news is 1003A last year was released on July 11th, and the applications were given back or were awarded at the end of July. We're rolling this out sooner than last year for the A dollars, and that is because school identification is based on the accountability grades. So that cannot come out till later in summer. However, because of the difficulty we're in with data this year with ISTEP, we're actually using some other indicators to get that awarded sooner. Last year, 1003G will be allocated at the end of this July, 2013, and we are behind, and it was because there was a discrepancy in the funds, so we had to host some calls with the USDE to figure out what that...
From the federal side.
Yeah. to figure out what those discrepancies were, because if you know, the 1003G are cohort-based, so before we released the applications for new cohort to be added, a fourth cohort, we had to make sure we could fulfill the cohorts 1, 2, and 3 for the 3 years they were already awarded the dollars. So that's all been cleared, and the applications are going to be awarded at the end of July. So we are about 2 months behind from last year on 1003G.
Okay, questions?
Yeah, one to finish up with IPS and
So
Boyd.
sorry. I mean, so sorry
Yeah,
that
no.
that didn't finish.
Dr. Hinckley, I just wonder, I don't see anyone left from the mayor's office. I don't know if they stayed or they had to go. But is there any point in discussion, you know, the mayor's office has assumed oversight for the turnaround operators and the turnaround academies in Indianapolis on behalf of the board. Is there any point in discussion with the mayor's office? Would they have any interest in engaging in Marshall? Is that something that would be positive or not necessary at this point? You want to think about that? Yeah.
I have had one initial conversation with Mr. Groth about John Marshall, just as if you will, an introductory conversation, and just to establish a communication network. Let me say that if it is the board's position that Voyager, I think the 14 feeder school issues is one that many of the elementary schools did not feel was particularly helpful. Part of that is we started late and there were a lot of other dynamics. But certainly, if the board feels strongly about that relationship to continue, we could certainly explore that. But we're prepared to present to all of you at your, when you put us on the agenda, but I believe it will be strong.
And would you also say that perhaps the hiring of Voyager is also contingent upon SIG money for the school, or
On which one for the schools?
the SIG grants? With working with
They're
Voyager?
They're not.
John Marshall's not eligible for a SIG
Oh, that's
grant,
correct.
LG.
That's
But
correct.
we will be applying for Little Ed
Yes.
for some of our schools. We just haven't seen the application.
Let me say that what we present to you will not be dependent on the funding.
Okay.
It will happen.
All right.
And just as an aside, for whatever it's worth, we're in the process of undergoing an operational review by the business community. I'm set to receive those recommendations tomorrow. Then we engage the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce. We're really doing a review to gain efficiencies and reduce our bureaucracy. But we're asking for help from the business community. Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce has been very helpful and supportive. So we'll find our efficiencies elsewhere. And, we're prepared to do whatever it takes to accomplish.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My apologies again. David?
Appreciate the clarifications and your comments, Superintendent. I now need to, I'm trying to square our obligation as a board to ensure adequate funding for the turnaround activities we have underway with the timeline issues, with the realities of the people apparently no longer in the room, but that are trying to operate schools that can't make plans until they know whether they have the funds available. And indeed, on a contract basis, I assume have the right to walk away if they don't have the funds available. So, and I apologize, but could you, and I'm not, this is not a, let me be clear, because this is not about whether it's a SIG A, a SIG G, or even a SIG. What I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page on, or not, but try to get us on the same page, is with regard to the commitment of the board, superintendent included if she chooses, to fulfill our statutory duty to assure adequate resources for the work they're doing. And the timeline doesn't, I appreciate clarification, the timeline still doesn't feel comfortable in terms of their making timely decisions about their students and their faculty. How do we reconcile that, or do we?
So I guess I'm talking about a matter of progress, and since I was not a year
I
ago
understand.
in how all this worked.
And it's a new administration, and I'm sympathetic to that.
Well-
But I'm still trying to get to the point where the kids.
I'm just making sure that everybody's getting things on track as they're supposed to be. But I guess my question is, how do you make assurances to a school prior to the process being formally implemented? So, I guess I don't know if the SIG grants allow for me to do that, to say, hey, we're going to guarantee you this amount of money. When the competitiveness of the grants come in, I certainly don't want to be in violation of something in my own department in expending funds. Is that what you were?
I'm beyond SIG. I'm trying to, SIG may satisfy it, but nobody in the department
Well,
can confirm the result of a SIG grant
Well,
today.
no.
I'm trying to understand the relationship between the timing of the decisions, and again, I feel a statutory duty, Tony cited the language directly, to ensure the adequacy of funds for these institutions.
So are you asking if I have other funds? Because the tuition monies, all that's been determined by ADM. I mean, it's all determined.
There's 4 pots of money, tuition supporters, Title I, 103A and 103G.
Right.
So there's 4 pots of dollars that are supporting the turnaround operations. And 2 of them are grant-based and timeline-based. And yes, the timelines are one, like I said, the G is a little delayed, 2 months delayed. The A is earlier than last year. So
Well, maybe then the only point that we can make, I mean, I take the superintendent's point. Maybe the only thing that we can do right this moment is to just reiterate the board's
Yes.
commitment to these turnarounds, to the effort, to the long story that Dan very eloquently laid out of why we got here, and to just make sure that and I understand there are needs around the state and there are needs in other places, but we made this a priority. This is our commitment and our obligation, and therefore I think we would ask the department staff as they review the SIG applications to keep in mind and remember the priority that this board set for these turnaround operators. And I'd like that in the minutes.
I plan to do that.
Fine, that's all this has been
Yeah.
about. It's just all we've asked for in today, and was very helpful actually, was to hear, first of all, some very promising signs of progress in an initial year that I'm sure was very difficult, but also an acknowledgement from these TSOs that funding is critical, and that there are still startup costs, if you kind of call them that are required for them to continue to make progress. And to Danielle's point, there aren't many buckets to go to find those startup costs, and so we just very much appreciate the consideration of the department in acknowledging that this is a very high priority for the board as that SIG process goes forward.
Madam Superintendent?
Yes.
I have appreciated today's discussion, and we probably should have had it prior months. We're all getting in gear here, new administration, so it's clear to me at least that the federal government gives us this money and we apply our wisdom as a state against our priorities, against the SIG grants, any other monies as well. I really don't care what pot either. And I think in the last year, a couple things were different. First of all, we had a change superintendent, so that's just going to be some difference. But we had a group of people in charge of these turnarounds, and I think there's some wisdom in that. If they're just, you call them, I forget the name, counselors, or the people you're hiring to be. Okay.
Sure.
So we need a very dedicated crew in here to take care of this priority of the board. It's not only, it's very significant for these children, and you visit these schools, it literally bring you to tears, the turnaround schools, how we got there. Nobody should have to send their child to a violent school, a school that doesn't work. And because that was so important, we had to do this. I also think if we'll concentrate talented people over this in the department, we're going to learn a lot. We're going to learn how to prevent getting here in the future, how to pull out, if there's a school getting in trouble, pull them out more quickly, what works, what doesn't, because we're going to make some mistakes here. So in very difficult situation, there's more than meets the eye here on these turnarounds. We're going to find out a lot that we can use in future circumstances. So for the sake of these children and their future, the neighborhoods and community, for the learning we can get from it, I would say two things. Let's make sure there's a concentrated group of folks in the department overseeing this, because the consequences of error are enormous. And what we could learn from it, positively speaking, is enormous. Number two, it's clear to me that last year, there's some dissonance here. The operators are getting confusing messages or unclear. They don't know. The department needs to say, getting you proper funding is a priority of this department. The operator then knows that you're going to exercise that priority when you review federal monies made available for this purpose. And that needs to be made very, very clear.
We have dialogue tomorrow.
And I appreciate it. Thank you.
I think we are now ready for adjudication, and I will appoint Neil as the chair for this process, and I will excuse myself.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, Neil.
Thank you, Superintendent. So, we've been through this before, but so you'll recognize some of this language. Gordon, are you going to come up and join me? Okay. So this is the administrative proceeding conducted pursuant to Indiana Code, Indiana Code 20-31-9.5-3, and the order of the Marion Superior Court to redetermine the amount of state tuition support to be withheld from the state tuition support that would otherwise have been distributed to the Indianapolis Public Schools and Gary Community School Corporation from July 1 to December 31, 2012, to be used for the operation of the turnaround academies. The reference number for this proceeding is 09-062013. Board members received a copy of the Notice of Recommendation and Administrative Proceeding that was provided to Dr. Hinckley and her counsel and Dr. Pruitt and her counsel on June 10, 2013. Neither school corporation submitted any documents for consideration. We will proceed as follows. This is an informal proceeding. A representative of the department will present the recommendation on the amount of state tuition support that should be withheld from IPS, and a representative of IPS will then have the opportunity to present the school corporation's position on the recommendation. Then we'll do the same for the Gary Community Schools, and the representative from Gary will have an opportunity to present. Information provided by the parties will be under oath. Board members may ask questions of the representatives. At the conclusions of the presentations and questions, board members will discuss and make a decision. The board's decision will be determined by an affirmative vote of at least 6 members. So, who is going to make a presentation or provide information to the board? Can they stand, please, to be sworn in? I think we can do this jointly, right? Okay. So, anybody else? Is there anyone from Gary? Yes, okay. So if you would stand, please. Thank you. Okay. So, I guess it's the 3 of you. Do the 3 of you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the information you provide to the board during this proceeding is true and correct? Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, starting with IPS, it's my understanding that Deputy Superintendent Shockey will be presenting the department's recommendation and that Dr. Peggy Hinckley will be representing IPS. Do either of you have any questions before we begin? Okay, so Danielle, would you please come up and make your presentation? And then the board will be able to ask questions.
For the record, my name is Danielle Shockey, Deputy Superintendent, and it's my pleasure to present on behalf of the DOE today. I'd like to first start by thanking the legislative members of Indiana that were part of this work, for whom the department's recommendation for this resolution would not be possible. We are here on remand from the trial court's decision in Board of School Commissions of the City versus Indiana State Board of Education and Indiana Department of Education. The trial court overturned the board's May 2012 determination of the amount of tuition support to be withheld from Gary and IPS to be used for the operation of the turnaround academies within those respective school systems. Following the trial court's order, the department recommends and the parties agree to the amount set forth in Table 3 of the department's memorandum. We ask that the board adopt the agreement of the parties.
Succinct, wait, stay, there might be, do any board members have any questions of the deputy superintendent before we move forward?
I have one, counsel. I'll ask it later.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let's just, anyway, particularly for, Bishop, no? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Hinckley, would you please come forward? Go ahead.
Thank you. In representing the Board of School Commissioners for the Indianapolis Public Schools, the board has reviewed this potential agreement and is in support, and if it is your decision to approve it, they will consider it tomorrow evening for final approval. We have no disagreement or concerns about the agreement.
Thank you. Also, wait, hang on, just let me make sure are there any questions from my colleagues on the board for Dr. Hinckley? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for your presentations. Now let's move. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Danielle, I guess you're making, hang on. We got to have another presentation from the department first, sorry. No? Oh, you don't? Okay, so okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. I got, that's what you, okay.
Oh, it's all right.
So your recommendations were for both, and got it, okay. Sorry, apologize. Okay, so would you please make your presentation?
Yes. Good morning. My name is Attorney Tracy Coleman. I'm here with our superintendent, Dr. Cheryl Pruitt. Also, we have present the president of our board, Rosie Washington, board members LaBrenda King-Smith, Antoine Clemens, and Robert Campbell. Our new superintendent, she took over on July 1st. And her first day of working, she was at Roosevelt to look over this transition. And we definitely appreciate the efforts of our new state superintendent, Ritz, to provide the Gary Community School Corporation and Edison Learning with the mediator to help us through this process. When our new superintendent learned that the boilers were not working at Roosevelt because Edison's chief of operations had left, she made sure that she sent her own person to Roosevelt to make sure that water was in those boilers, because it's an older school, and so there are issues when you deal with a historic building. And so through this mediation process, initially, unfortunately, it was an adversarial process, because that's how people end up in court. But we're thankful now with our new state superintendent, we're able to do things like Indianapolis Public School System did, which is basically to go through a mediation process where you sit down and you talk about all the details. Because in the end, the common denominator for all of us is the education of our children. And from the Gary Community School Corporation, for the approximately 10,000 students who have chosen to remain with our superintendent and also with the board to receive their education, everyone is working diligently to look out for the best interests of these children. And so we come today in support of the state superintendent's recommendation to return those monies back to the Gary Community School Corporation. Our efforts, our energies are on helping our children succeed, and we appreciate the support of the state superintendent and also the support of this board by releasing monies which will help the school corporation do that. And I thank you very much for your time today.
Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you very much, Ms.
Thank
Coleman.
you.
Appreciate your coming down. Okay, this is now the point of board discussion. So Dave, you had a question for council.
I'm trying to understand clearly, just because it's 80%, it's not 100%, it's not zero. This is settling a piece of litigation with or without precedental impact on forward decisions with regard to allocation of ADM funding to the district.
Yes, I mean, if that was a question,
It
yes.
was a yes or a no question.
All right,
Okay.
yes, yes.
With precedent?
Oh, I'm sorry, no, it would not be precedent because it's not going to the Court of Appeals.
So I just want to make sure all the parties understand that this sets no precedent one way or the other for forward decisions.
Well, actually, that's two questions. It does not set legal precedent because we're not in the Court of Appeals. This case is settled. It's a trial court decision, which of course is afforded great weight, but it's not a Court of Appeals, it's a Supreme Court decision. As far as you folks are concerned, you certainly want to be consistent in making your decisions. So I think in that sense, you're establishing a benchmark for future decisions. But, obviously you have a unique set of circumstances here.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand in exercising the vote. There was much factually in contention and legally in contention that any of, well, there's 3 parties in the board, I guess, department, 2 districts, that any of those parties might say, well, wait a minute, I didn't think that was going to carry over. I thought we were just exercising the ability given to us by the legislative authority to resolve this. Or we now have some sort of a new funding formula for how schools are going to be funded in this context. And I'm still not sure I understand which. And I'd like to before I vote. And by the way, it's not a plus or minus because the 2 districts didn't get as much as they thought they should. And the department theoretically gave either exactly the right amount or whatever. Other folks thought they should have got more. But for the legislature, we wouldn't be able to even resolve this. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand for my vote that we're clear going forward, that this doesn't establish some sort of an automatic, or it does, funding formula for this kind of a situation in the future. Precedent or non-precedent? That's
right, and that's a difficult question to answer. Like I say, as a legal precedent, no. As an administrative precedent, obviously the circumstances here are very unique. You have litigation that's proposed to be settled, and you have a special action by the General Assembly. And presumably this is not going to happen again anytime in the near future. On the other hand,
Well, there could be other takeover. I mean, there
well,
could be
okay.
other takeovers, turnarounds. I don't like the word takeover, but there could be other situations where the state intervenes and assigns the school to a turnaround operator.
Fair enough. But as I say, you're going to make a decision, and you can't rewrite history when someone comes before you again and asks you about the decision you make today. Is this decision automatically applied to every case that's presented to you in the future? No. But do you need to be consistent? Certainly. And I'm sure you would attempt to do so. But obviously, like I say, this is a very unique situation, and you're dealing with it, on a case-by-case basis.
Well, if it's case by case, then maybe one question, you got to help me here, because but if the parties all agree it's non-precedental, then isn't it non-precedental? And if the parties all agree it's precedental, then it's precedental.
Well, it's like I said, you're asking two different questions. Is it a legal precedent? Can you go to court and say, you did this before, you have to do it again? The answer to that is no, because you're settling a lawsuit. But from an administrative standpoint, like I say, you want to be consistent. But do you automatically do this in the future? No, because the situation here is unique. I'm not sure how else I can answer that for you.
I interpret that as non-precedental, including not binding on the DOE or the board.
Okay.
And I guess that's the context in which I'd be prepared to affirm it. Because I don't want to, speaking bluntly, I don't want to have IPS or Gary sitting there thinking every time that they have to make a decision like this, they only get 80 cents on the dollar. On the other hand, I don't want us thinking if we're going to allocate $1 to a school that it's automatically less 20 cents. So to me, this is unique, and I'd just soon settle it and move on. leaving everybody to figure it out in the future.
There are consequences of this precedent that will be unpalatable to a lot of folks down the road.
I don't want to speak, I guess, for Gary, but if I thought every time we ran into another turnaround that I gave up 20 cents automatically, that'd be problematic. On the other hand, for us to allocate $1, it ought to be $1.
Wait, I don't believe it's appropriate to have, this is a board discussion,
Yeah,
so I don't believe it's appropriate. for any
You're in charge.
comments from the floor. Let me ask Mr. Tony if he has something to say.
I don't think by approving this, we are adopting the opinion of the court, or even saying we agree with the opinion of the court. From a purely legal perspective, I think we did exactly what the statute requires in terms of how we did the initial allocation. So that's the legal part of it. But I think there's an equitable issue here as well. And for me, there's also a broader educational issue, and that is that the money should always follow the child, whether it's going out of the traditional system or in the traditional system. The numbers are what they are here, and as a result, there was an overpayment. There was overpayment of $1.7 million as it relates to Roosevelt, which is quite significant in terms of Gary Community School Corporation being able to offer educational services. So the equitable thing to do, which I don't think is precedential, and which doesn't mean we did anything wrong, is to return that money to the school corporation. And I'm going to be supporting doing that.
May I ask a question of council, just to confirm again? We need 6 members to approve this? Is that based on?
I will defer to staff on that one because I'm not as familiar with the education statute as I would like to be. Is 6 the number? 6 is the number, yes, sir.
So that means everyone, as I counted, there were 6 of us left with the superintendent having to recuse herself. Are there any other comments on the proposal before we move forward? I have one, but I want to wait.
Before we go down that road,
Yeah.
Council, is it 6 votes for, or just 6 people voting? I'm sorry.
6 votes for.
6 votes for, okay.
So, go ahead.
The only question that occurs to me is the entire framework for funding turnaround efforts by the board. And I'm just wondering if the other pieces need to be included as we move forward here. We just heard a lot of testimony. One reason I wanted to listen to those folks, do we need to make sure there's a solution for the whole problem, and what does the superintendent need to bring back to us in terms of the commitment to these turnarounds?
Well, yeah, I think we heard a pretty strong commitment from the superintendent that she's going to commit to that funding. So I would think that we could handle those independently of one another.
Can you ask for that framework before we move forward with any of these moves? What are some timeline issues?
I believe we have to do this before the 30th of June, is that
I
correct?
believe that's true, yes.
So what you're suggesting, Dan, is some kind of contingent approval?
Well, there has to be some kind of, it seems to me, a written priority for the turnarounds, that we're going to see it through with the funding. We have contracts, we have intent, we have board leadership. And to get that clarified in the next week, along with this move, our other move is to appeal this, correct?
Yes, sir.
It'd be much, but I don't want to leave one part of the equation dangling. Do we want to more, I appreciated the discussion, by the way, and I appreciated the superintendent's clarity on that. I think it helped everybody. It sure helped me, and I really do appreciate it. But how, are those things, can you tie them together some way? Is there a better mind in the room on that issue. Something.
So you would be essentially saying something to the effect of that we would approve the settlement with the stipulation or the condition that that a very high priority would be placed on providing adequate funds for the turnaround academies for next year.
That essentially we outlined in the contract we entered with these folks, because, you know, one of the things that it's, you know, it's pretty easy. Okay, there's a student, there's the money, put it in their backpack, and whatever school they end up, you take the money out. But some schools they arrived at had been depleted of resources, systems all broke down, student recruitment records. So some of these folks had a difficult job, plus. And so I want to make sure we stick with this. And again, there's only one thing to do, I think, of the young people in these schools and fulfilling our responsibility. We set some actions in motion, and I want to see it through. And so I don't know how should we tie that in there with greater clarity?
There are other mechanisms to make sure that the TSOs are taken care of properly.
So I have to confess, and I guess I confess publicly since it's a public meeting, I'm very torn by this. I believe that we made the correct decision, as Tony does, I believe we made the correct legal decision. We were advised by then department counsel, and the law seemed pretty straightforward, that there was a certain date on which the count was made, and that was the date, and the numbers were the numbers at that date. I certainly agree with you that money needs to follow. I'm all for money following students, but there also has to be a certain date when you count the number of students there are, and it can't be. It seemed to me, based on the advice of then counsel and based on my own amateur reading of what the statute suggested, that we made the right decision when we had that withhold based on the date we did. So I was certainly in support of, I don't agree with the Superior Court decision, and I certainly was pleased to hear that the decision was made to appeal it. And then, kind of, in a way, if you'll forgive my return to literature, deus ex machina, the state legislature decides they're going to solve this problem for us. Frankly, certainly without consulting me. Maybe they consulted other people, but they certainly didn't ask my opinion on what we did or why we did it or what our rationale was. But they did decide, in their wisdom, that funds ought to be made available. Part of me wants to see the appeal go through. Part of me wants to have what I believe is the right conclusion in law confirmed, which I think it ultimately would be. On the other hand, the legislature's will was clear, and I don't discount the fact that this is a significant amount of funds for both Gary and IPS. In a sense, it's almost like an add-on. The state has basically decided, the legislature's decided to kind of give you back money that you may or may not have really deserved to have. They've made that decision. So I'm struggling with this one. And then there's the whole issue of, ensuring that the turnarounds are adequately funded for next year, given the priority that we made it. And unfortunately, since I will not be here beyond today, I don't have any ability to continue to press that issue, although I know my colleagues will be diligent in doing so.
Here's the problem. If we do nothing and just continue with the appeal, we do a disservice to the kids in Indianapolis as well as Gary, no matter what side of the equation you're on, because we have $10 million in funding that could be used to educate kids right now that will just sit up for probably another year or two while this winds its way through the Court of Appeals and probably ultimately the Supreme Court. They need that money immediately. We talked about the deficits and the cuts that IPS is having to make. Gary's having to make draconian cuts. To just allow $10 million to sit for maybe 2 years when they really need the money right now would.
No guarantee they're going to get the money. If we win on appeal, they wouldn't get that money. That money would be available for other
Yeah,
purposes.
then the money would likely stay with the TSOs. But right now, no one gets it. The TSOs aren't getting it.
Right.
The school
Well,
corporations aren't getting it.
TSOs aren't going to get it.
So
under
we're
any-
just putting, you know.
So, just a thought, trying to bring it all together. Maybe there's too many words in the 5 paragraphs of the resolution. Maybe we ought to just say that we concur that Gary will receive X, IPS will receive X, but, 2 numbers. They would otherwise receive it. Number 2, that the department commits to full funding for the turnaround. And number 3, that everybody dismisses litigation, we move on.
Second.
I was afraid to be so simplistic. That's where I was going. I didn't know if you could get it. That's clear direction. And then the young people, it isn't, Neil, your concerns, you're right, but this is a very practical approach, it seems. We do our best to take care of our commitment here, which really, with a couple departing board members, I want to say, has been all about improving and making sure people had a chance at a good life. Seems it gets there if legal counsel would tell us what he thinks. I kind of like that direct approach.
So I'm sorry, can we reiterate the revised proposal?
The amount that IPS would receive is $7,516,046.72. The amount that Gary would receive is $1,741,318.25. So, to your equitable point, with which I agree, if the money's there and the legislature is appropriate, let's put it to work. Second part is, which collapses, I guess the earlier conversation is, the department, as a matter of the settlement, commits to the funding of the turnarounds. Fulfilling that for this year, without regard to SIG or other, I don't care about sources, and I don't want to tie the superintendent's hands exactly as to sources. And the third is litigation dismissed.
Second.
Do we need the department's okay to, I mean, they're party to the settlement. Can you live?
It's the board, the party, I think.
Both. It's both. It's both.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's why our
So
superintendent.
so before we call the question, I just want to make sure that DOE can live with that motion.
Yes, as I stated when we came up there, we recommend, and both parties agree, that we agree to the amount set forth in Table 3.
We've added a piece.
We're adding a condition.
I think I may have misspoken as to the amounts.
Okay.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, you did, actually.
No, I think I did.
Yeah, you did. The amounts available are 6,012,837.39 for IPS and 1,393,054.61 for Gary.
I was reflecting claims.
So again, just to reiterate, I want to make sure we're clear about this because we're adding a condition in a sense. So the motion would now say that the board supports the decision to provide IPS and Gary with the funds that were provided by the state legislature.
As recommended by the Department of Education.
As recommended by the Department of Education.
Okay.
That the department will commit to assuring adequate funding of the turnarounds for the school year 2013-2014 with no specific pots of money designated. And that therefore, as a result, the litigation will be dismissed without any prejudice.
just,
what I heard, and that's what.
That's a motion on the floor, and there's been a second to that motion.
well, just before you, I just want to be clear. On the numbers, the IPS number, because I misspoke before, was $6,012,837.39, and the Gary number was $1,393,054.61. I just need to correct that.
That would be a motion.
I was going to say, hopefully this is a question of no consequence, but, you know, we do have this settlement floating around, multiple parties involved, the board and the Department of Education. And I see heads nodding, but I haven't heard any voices from the Department of Education that this is acceptable to them as well. Not so much that the board's decision, but as the department goes forward with the settlement, I'm trying to figure out if this would be a problem as far as settling the litigation is concerned.
Let me just, before you answer that question, let me observe that I could vote for this proposal.
I understand.
That's good, because we need is goal 6.
Exactly.
Well, to answer your question, I think the additional component of the department guaranteeing full funding to turnarounds is not consistent with the statute that was read earlier. 2031 9.5-3 puts funding of the turnarounds, as you said earlier, in the board's hands. It says the state board based upon recommendations. All the department can do is make a recommendation. Funding is with the board. So to add anything in an agreement that says the department will guarantee thus and so is not consistent with state law. And we cannot agree with anything that is not
Outside the authority of the board to do that.
No, but the department.
outside of the department to do that.
Well, to direct the board to do that, yeah. Right, the board directs the department.
So are you saying that the board will make the decisions about sources and amounts of funding?
We are here because the board made a decision about tuition funding. The department makes the recommendation. I mean, that's the way the statute reads. So what I heard from board member Elsener was a request that the department will guarantee full funding. That is not within the purview of what the department can do.
That's what we're doing.
Well, I think with that understanding that the board is asking, directing, forgive me, I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but we can put that in
Commanding, cajoling.
the department and the superintendent to do what you've requested. But there are a lot of moving parts here, so we just want to make sure that it all goes smoothly as far as your decision is
So
concerned. as far
it
as
would be
litigation
better,
is
so
concerned.
would it be more kind of correct to say as a rephrasing of that second part of the motion, that as a friendly amendment, that
Or make it a
the
separate motion.
the state board recommits or reaffirms its commitment to the adequate funding of the turnaround academies for 2013-14 and instructs the department to ensure that those funds are available? Would that be more consistent with your interpretation of the board providing the
The way I would hear that and is that I think it would make better language to be consistent with the statute, that the department in its recommendations will consider the board's priorities in making its recommendation to the board.
Or Neil, we say exactly what it is we're really trying to say and make part of the motion that the TSOs be funded at a minimum at the level they were funded last year.
But the problem is we have no ability to enforce that in a sense, or to ensure that it happens. I mean, we can.
The statute tells us to.
There's no pots of money to do it with, except the SIG grants, which are a competitive grant that the department is unwilling and or unable and or unwilling to commit. And I guess I understand why. There are legal impediments to committing.
But Neil, I'd just stay out of that, because now the board's spoken, and they know the template. When you receive a grant request, you put a template, a prioritization around it. So any foundation that receives a request, usually their boards outline their priorities, and we want them to find the resources to keep them at the funding they had last year. And it seems if the template of priorities is well communicated to the folks judging whatever pot, grant or whatever pot, they'll get it done. And then we keep our commitment to the students and communities. Everybody's cool. The board has spoken. The statute requires us to speak. And that's our commitment. And it seems it makes it very clear. And they'll have to do their work in a professional manner, which I suspect and I know they will do, because we've spoken. We were asked to speak by statute. Without getting in the middle of evaluating grants, we've spoken.
So the motion, that part of the motion would read something to the effect that SBO, the State Board of Education, reaffirms its commitment that the turnaround school operators be funded at least at the same level in 2013-14 as they were in 2012-13. Work with us here.
Well, I just say, we're here on remand. We're here directly dealing with the issue that was before the trial court. And that was very specific. And I think that the proposed language actually goes well beyond the issue at hand. The issue at hand is a snapshot picture of funding last year. And now we're adding in something that has nothing to do, and it's a prospective problem.
We see it as covered. We want all the children taken care of. So the board sees it as covered, and they should be tied.
So I would say either you or accept
We have litigation. The board made a recommendation last year. There was a judicial review by IPS, fair and square. A judge made his decision. We may not agree with it, but he's the judge and he gets to make that decision until somebody overturns it. That's the rule, that's the law. And now it's back in front of you, and the General Assembly has appropriated this money or passed the law that it passed. So I think the question that's in front of you today is really a pretty limited one as far as the money is concerned. On the other hand, you know, if there is an expression of the board, statement of the board to the department, I think that's fine. But you know, as far as getting the nuts and bolts addressed, you know, you have this dollar amount that's in front of you on remand, and I would suggest that you kind of focus your decision on that issue alone. Then, you know, if you want to, you know, have dialogue with the department about other issues, go right ahead. But I don't want to mess up, you know, the settlement and you know what the direction that the General Assembly is going.
How would it mess up the settlement?
I don't know.
I don't think anyone from IPS or Gary would have any problem with that statement being part of the board's.
They asked for it, they confirmed it, we're
Giving them their money. We're confirming their money, which is what they want, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, that's perfectly understandable. We are at the same time, as Dan said, holistically approaching the other children who are affected by saying that we are reaffirming our commitment that these turnaround academies be funded adequately next year.
And that has no effect on the first.
And that's no effect on the first, and that we.
I didn't interrupt, but in this moment, the board is the judge in this matter, not a party for a negotiation point of view. And by adding additional language beyond what we're here for in the litigation, the board would be acting outside of an adjudicator and as a party. And I mean, Gordon, you can speak to that.
My concern is that you run the risk of rewriting the recommendation.
Well, part of the recommendation was to dismiss the appeal. So that is clearly.
Do you think IPS and Gary are going to
Us
have
as
a
a
problem
party.
with that in addition to the settlement? It doesn't affect them. So what party in the settlement is going to have a concern with it?
One party is the Department of Education.
Well, that's what we're
Well,
trying to.
we're just giving their instruction, which we're required to do.
Yes.
In this proceedings, is a representative of the news.
Yes, you may.
Okay. I think to Mr. Elsner's point about rubrics for competitive grants, we absolutely have rubrics for which we will look at the 1003Gs and the 1003As, and absolutely to the superintendent's point, we put priority on the turnaround and the schools in the greatest need. Part of the funding formula is based on ADM count, And in previous dollars awarded, the council students, I'm just going to use Arlington as an example, was awarded dollars based on 1,105 students. They currently are projected to have 518. So I think we would have concern to say we can continue to give dollars when those dollars follow those students to another school. So those dollars are awarded for those other 500 children someplace else.
That's just a language.
Well, that would be our concern, I think, to that third
That would be,
point
we could
is-
tell that with language. That could be settled with language.
There's a motion, well, so where are we, guys?
Well, one piece is, and the superintendent affirmed to the group, that she intended to make the funding of the, I think I used the word right, that the funding for the Turnaround Academy is a priority. Not sure I know what that means, but it is a priority. But at the core of this, Tony said it, is we may be in an adjudicatory mode, but we're fundamentally deciding on what conditions we want to give up our right to appeal the decision. And that was the source of my concern about precedent versus non-precedent. It remains my source of concern about making sure we don't overstate things. And it seems to me that if we're going to give up our right to appeal and have the Supreme Court decide how schools are funded as opposed to having life go on, I would much prefer that the districts get their money, point one, that the turnarounds get what they need, point two, and that no offense to the lawyers in the room, I'm one, that they go, you are too, that life move on. I have to. There's times when life needs to move on. So the simplicity of pay the money, dismiss the litigation without any collateral language, get rid of the 5 explanatory paragraphs, and have some appropriate statement about priority, assurance by the board, echoing the superintendent's commitment, because when we asked the question, she answered it. That seems to me to be all we need. And sometimes to go beyond all we need is more problematic. It doesn't say anything for the future of the funding formulas as they play out. It just says we're going to resolve this litigation, we're going to confirm our commitment to the priority of funding for the turnarounds, and Gary and IPS get their money.
And that's the motion that was made in the second. That's what's on the floor now.
The only issue then is whether the department is willing to accept that kind of, that motion, or we're going to hear, next week that there somehow was not acceptable, but everyone else seems to be.
Their decision, our decision isn't dependent upon whether or not they accept it. They don't even have to decide that now.
Plus, they already said, the superintendent said that's her commitment.
They're a party to the settlement, I think they
Yeah,
do
but
have to.
they don't have to vote.
No, they don't have to vote. but
We
they-
can do what we want to do.
I
and
guess
move
they
on.
could, I guess you're right, I guess their only alternative would be to reject the settlement, and then we would go back to appeal, so I don't think they'd want to do that.
Can I call a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a motion, are we clear about the motion?
Yes.
Or, you want-
I wasn't clear, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Mr. Shane, could you say it again?
Those are the
I'm sorry.
5 paragraphs at the back. I'm sorry, I put the just point, in lieu of that, point 1 would be that a payment is made to IPS and a payment is made to Gary in the amount $6 million and $1 million. Point 2 would be that the board, and I'll leave it to the superintendent whether she wants, I misspoke, we didn't ask her, she said that she was going to view it as a priority, so it's up to her whether she wants to join in this, but that the board establishes the funding of the turnarounds as a priority. Stop me if I say something different this time.
It's a good formulation, Dave, actually, that Tony made, that, so if I may.
Sure, that was never really accepted as an amendment. His
Oh.
original motion was still there.
Okay, well, would anyone, so let me let you finish, and then we'll have a friendly amendment. because I'd like to make that amendment.
Okay. And then the third was the litigation is dismissed by agreement of the parties.
Request, I ask if there could be a friendly amendment that specifies for point 2, that the state board reaffirms its commitment or its priority, or that its commitment that the TSOs be funded at least at the same level next year, 2013-14, as they were in 2012-13. So it's a little more specific than reaffirming the commitment that they be adequately funded. It's that they're funded at the same level next year as this year. They need at least that much money to be successful.
As a seconder, I accept that as friendly as Dave does. We need your vote.
Well,
You need my vote.
if the board affirms the priority of funding at a level no less than, I'm okay. But I don't want to, again, I don't want to tie the department's hands to a precise number. Ceilings become floors and floors become ceilings. So the board would confirm that the funding of the turnaround academies is a priority at a level not less than, if that was your amendment, at a level not less than.
That's fine.
Do we need to put per student average that we established?
I think it could be total funding.
You know, they know. It ties it all together, and it doesn't hurt anybody.
So the board affirms as a priority funding of the TSOs at a level not less than they received in the current school year.
12-13.
Is that, Dave, you okay with that? You got that, Laura? Board affirms as a priority funding of the TSOs at a level not less than the current year. Okay, so it's a three-part motion, just to be clear. IPS and Gary received the amounts recommended by the department, 80% of what they were owed. The board reaffirms as a priority the funding of the TSOs, and that the litigation is dismissed. Those are the three parts of the motion, and it's been seconded. Okay, let's call the question, and let's do it, I guess we should do it in a roll call vote. So let me just go around the table. Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Shane?
Yes.
Mr. Edwards? Yes. Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Okay, and I, as the chair, I vote yes as well. So we have the 6 votes we need. All right. Superintendent Ritz, your chair is yours. I'm very happy to give you back the chair. Thank you for your patience, and thank you, board members.
Thank you.
Working with groups of lawyers is so much fun.
Not as good as working with superintendents. Oh.
Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We have common school loan applications.
Would you like an approval of the consent agenda, a motion to approve the consent agenda? Or do you need to?
Well, I was going to list them all
I'm
out, but
sorry.
I guess we
No,
don't
you-
need
I'm
to.
sorry. Maybe.
Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Second? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. There is no new action, no new business to come before this board today, and there are no board operations to be discussed. This meeting is adjourned.
Could